Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game So I got a fun video for you guys today because it's one that you requested for me to make. Now that the new version of Supermodel is out with the new UI or user interface, I'm going to be doing a Supermodel tutorial so you can know how to emulate Sega Model 3 games easily. Because some things are still the same, some things have changed, and I know because some people are going to be using this for the first time now that it has that UI. I want to go over every single function to make sure you can run every single Model 3 game on your PC. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we have a Patreon link down below as well. But when I say Supermodel runs every single Model 3 game to the gold standard, I 100% mean it. Honestly, there should be a new category, the Platinum or Palladium standard, because this thing is just absolutely rock solid amazing, not only running every single Sega Model 3 game out there, but also giving you so many different enhancements. You can do something like play Scud Race at 4:3 in 1920 by 1080 resolution. You can kind of just play around with whatever you want, which we'll get into in just a moment. So as far as where to find this, you're going to find a link in the description below, and that is going to go over to GitHub, or you're going to pop over to the Releases tab. You want to download whatever the most recent release is. As of this point in time, you're going to see it right here on the screen, but of course you might be watching this 3 to 6 months down the line, so just make sure you grab the most recent one. It'll give you a time there. And even though this tutorial is predicated on using Windows, all of the settings in the emulator are basically going to be the same, so you can use this for whatever operating system you want. And before you ask me, I have no idea if there's ever going to be an Android or iOS port of Supermodel, so definitely one of those things. Maybe the developers will make it, maybe they won't, but I have no idea, and everyone loves to ask me. So now that you've actually downloaded Supermodel for Windows, you're going to go ahead and put it in whatever folder you want. This does not install, it unpacks, and it will live wherever you'd like it to. So just make sure you put that folder in a place you're going to be able to find it later and won't accidentally delete it. And you'll just go ahead and drag and drop that zip file from your downloads into the folder and extract the archive. Go ahead and hit extract here because it's already nested in a folder, so if you do the other version, you're going to end up 2 folders deep, and you don't really want to play around with that all that much. You can keep the zip file if you want, but once you unpack it, you're 100% good to go on deleting it. So when you actually go into the folders, you're going to see the supermodel.exe, but there's going to be 2 very important folders. There's going to be config and there's going to be ROMs, and I'm sure you know what goes in there. And as far as the actual ROMs are concerned, you can go ahead and just use whatever would work for MAME. You will be perfectly fine. Or if you actually have another version of Supermodel installed like I do, you can go ahead and just drag and drop them over or copy and paste them. I've already set up this emulator for the original video, so I don't need to move them again. I will just copy a few games I'm going to showcase over. But you're going to put every single game you find into ROMs. So just make sure you grab those games you definitely legally own and pop them in the ROMs folder. That is where Supermodel is going to look as far as the path is concerned. So if they are not in there by default, none of the games are going to run when you double click them in the emulator, and that would definitely be a pitfall. But once you get the ROMs in there, we kind of are only halfway to the goal, because I'm showing you this right now running at 1920 by 1080 at 60 Hz, and I'm extending both the widescreen as well as the background textures. By default, when you first open up the application, if you run a game, you're going to get it basically in medium resolution at a 4:3 aspect ratio. It's going to be a postage stamp size window on your modern monitor, and that's just because the emulator by default is going to try to do everything exactly the same way that it would appear in arcades. But we don't have to do that, so that's going to be the next thing we get into. All the diverse steps and settings and configs to make sure this thing runs exactly like you'd want it to. So if we actually go over to the second link I have in the description, we're going to find the Supermodel pre-configured files. These are by Wobbling Pixels and will basically set up all your controls for you. Now by default, Supermodel will try to do the best controls, but out there in the community, people have decided that other things make more sense. So if you go over to the Releases tab, you will see here, you'll pick it for direct input or X input. Those are 2 different controller configs. I use X input for both an Xbox Series X controller as well as a wheel, so that is the one that I recommend you guys actually pick up. Just put that into the Supermodel folder with the exe, open up the archive, and you'll see that we have a config and an NVRAM folder. So what we want to do here is we want to hit the extract here button. We do not want to extract it to its own folder, or else it's not going to be read into the system. So you go ahead and click extract here, and you will see the dates on the NVRAM as well as the config folders drop back to 2024. That's how you know it's installed properly. And now there's going to be settings saved both in the actual test menu as well as the controller configurations that you should just be able to sit down and play without having to think about too much of what you're doing in the future. And you can definitely open up that INI file and make any sort of changes you want, but for the most part, I would just say you're going to leave it exactly as is, outside of if you want to actually get the native refresh rate or frame rate out of Model 3. If you have a VRR display or some sort of TV that will allow you to actually have custom resolutions. Sometimes you have to play around with the resolution of Windows as it's exporting that signal, but otherwise it is something you do. But for the most part, I just lock this thing to 60 frames per second and go from there. Now, as we go through some of the options here, you're going to see I've selected X input. That's because that's the configuration I downloaded. If you want to have direct input, you just grab that file and you'll switch X input over to direct input. By default, it's giving the clock speed as 69. Very nice indeed, and that's where I would leave it as well. And you'll see here, this is where you can play around with the resolutions. By default, it's picking 1920 by 1080, but it is not selecting widescreen as well as wide background, so I would turn both of those on. Now, if you want to have this thing by 4:3, just go ahead and enter in a resolution on the X and Y axes. That way, you're actually going to constrain the image to 4:3. Think 640 by 480 or any other derivatives of that, where both numbers are multiplied by a factor of 2. All of the force feedback for the controls and wheels will be selected. All of the analog sensitivities will be altered with this configuration pack. And if you want to change anything, you can also go over into the key bindings menu. But again, for the most part, I would just leave this exactly as is once you actually use the Supermodel config pack, because there's not a single input here that I think could be allocated to a different control outside of maybe wanting to switch the mouse over for light gun games. So if you actually go into something like LA Machine Guns here, this is an analog game, even though it is quote-unquote a light gun genre game. So you can go ahead and use an analog controller on this. You could use a flight stick. You could switch it over to mouse input, but it's going to be able to be instantaneously controlled. And because all of those NVRAM files come over with the configurator as well, your accuracy should be totally fine. But if you do want to play around with any other calibration, just go over to the test menu. But in my experience, you're not going to have to do that whatsoever. And the best part is at 1920 by 1080 or even 4K, when I play this thing on my LG C4 OLED, when I actually lock that refresh rate, it looks stunning. But again, you don't need to be at the original refresh. You can do 60 Hz, and really you're not going to be able to tell unless you played both versions side by side. It can be very tricky to actually decipher which one's running at what frame rate. And you can turn VSync on as well when you're at 60 frames per second, just to make sure that you don't get any tearing, but even then it would be pretty minimal. But something like LA Machine Guns with Supermodel 3, the UI and the configuration files installed, you're just a straight up 10 out of 10. You can sit down and play it without thinking you're actually emulating anything. Now let's go through the rest of the settings here. At the top, this is where you're going to select all of your games. They are not in alphabetical order, but there's not many games, so you should be able to find it. To load a game, you can either click once and hit load game, or you can just double click the game title. And when you see more than one listing for the same game, that's going to be different regions. Export, Japan, USA. So pick whichever version you want. Again, you can play around with the PowerPC frequency. I want to be up around 80 when I'm playing something like Sega Rally 2, just because that's the one game that can actually have issues when you don't have the clock speed set correctly. And again, whatever input you want to use, you're going to do it there. So here again is where you're going to enter in that custom resolution, because by default you see it's 496 by 384. If you want 1080p, you're going to do 1920 by 1080. If you want 4K, you're going to input the actual resolutions there. I will leave in the description, if I remember, the resolution numbers for you. And you're even going to have the option to do internal super sampling, so you can play around with that. I would recommend maybe starting at 2 and bumping it up to see how your system handles it, because again, this can be relatively system intensive. You don't need to have a massive PC, but having a decent one should be fine. On the audio side of things, I would just leave everything as is, whether you have the configuration files installed or not. And honestly, networking, this is not a networking tutorial. If you want to see stuff like that in the future, leave me a comment down below. In miscellaneous, nothing is there. If you use the configuration pack, you're going to have force feedback enabled. If you don't, you want to select it right here. And then of course on the sensitivity tab, you'll have that config installed, but you can adjust it if you want a different feel for a different game, because honestly, I do still think that there are a few adjustments to be made depending on what racing game you are playing, or even something like LA Machine Guns. If you're using analog input that's not a mouse, I actually like to speed up the analog slightly so that I can get from one end of the screen to the other a lot quicker. And if you want to rebind any controls, you just do it in here. You double click, you hit your input, and that will save that for you so that it will bind every single time. And if you're wondering if you can drag and drop the config config and NVRAM folders from a previous install of Supermodel into the newest one, you 100% can. You don't have to install the pack over. You can just basically drag and drop those folders right into the new Supermodel folder and you will be good. And the one last thing, even though you have the config file, I still seen this give people a little bit of hell. If you get a network board error on something like Daytona USA 2, you just have to go into the test menu and navigate down to game assignments. You're going to do that with the number 8 and the number 6. Switch it over to single from master, go ahead and hit exit, and then exit out of this menu again. And that will then set this machine as just a single instance, not networked to any other cabinets, and you will boot right into the game. So if you ever see network board error in Supermodel, go into the test menu, switch the cabinet game assignment to single, and then save it and exit, and you will be playing the game. If you have any questions about this tutorial, you can leave them down below, and if you really get stuck or want me to help you set this up personally, I do have that $10 Emulation Night School Patreon tier on my Patreon where you get custom chat support from me. But honestly, if you just pay attention to what I'm doing here, you shouldn't need that whatsoever. But you can always come over to Patreon as well for $2 a month, because I basically tell everyone what I'm doing in advance. But Supermodel 3 just got that much more amazing and that much more accessible with the UI, and I can't wait to hear what people are playing on this. But I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.